Hey everyone. When I first told people I was going to walk the Appalachian Trail, I was bombarded with questions. So I wanted to take a minute and see if I could answer some of those questions and give a little bit of background about the trail itself. The Appalachian Trail is in the eastern part of the United States and runs from the south in Georgia to the north in Maine along the Appalachian Mountains. The trail was completed in 1937, and since then, roughly 99% of the trail has either been rebuilt or relocated. The first person to complete a thru-hike was Earl Shaffer in 1948. He hiked from the southern terminus to the northern terminus, and then because that wasn't enough, in 1965, he hiked from the northern terminus to the southern terminus. The Appalachian Trail walks across 14 states. I'll be walking from south to north, so I'll start in the state of Georgia at the southern terminus at Springer Mountain. From there, I'll walk into North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, and then New Hampshire, and finally end in Maine at the northern terminus, Mount Katahdin. Because of rerouting, the mileage year to year changes, but it's roughly 2,200 miles from start to finish, or to put it another way, about 5 million steps. The elevation change start to finish is roughly 464,000 feet, or about 89 miles, which is the same as climbing Mount Everest 16 times. Just for reference, and because I can, that little dot right there, that's where I live. I'm what's considered a NOBO, or northbound hiker, because I start at the south at Springer and hike to the north in Katahdin. There's also a SOBO who would start at Mount Katahdin and hike south to Springer Mountain. A flip-flopper typically will start at Springer Mountain, hike to a halfway point, then flip to Katahdin and hike back to the halfway point. Section hikers usually take the trail in smaller sections and take several years to actually complete a thru-hike. The average time for a thru-hike is roughly 165 days, or about 5 months. Quickest time was 41 days, and the longest could take up to 12 months. The trail is very well marked, and typically does not require a map and a compass. It's marked with white blazes, or roughly 165,000 of them for the entire trail. Each one of the blaze markings has special and unique meanings. There's marks indicating the trail continues straight, or that it turns right, or that it turns left, or there's an intersection, or even that the trail stops. Above the tree line, where there's no trees for blazes, the trail is marked with cairns, or stacks of rocks. Blue blazes indicate side trails, the side trails that lead to shelters, water sources, or points of interest. This brings up some more terms. A purist is someone who has to pass by each and every white blaze on the Appalachian Trail. A blue blazer will sometimes take a side trail and then rejoin the white blazes a little bit farther down the trail. A yellow blazer is a term to describe someone who will walk a road or sometimes get a ride around entire sections of the trail. And aqua blazing, where you float down a river instead of walking down the trail. If all this seems a bit confusing, just remember, follow the white blazes. So where do you sleep on the Appalachian Trail? Fortunately for most people, there's about 262 shelters along the way. They'll usually house between 8 and 20 people, sometimes more. Shelters average about 8 miles apart, but they could be as close as 5 miles or as far away as 30 miles from each other. Shelters also come with self-composting privies, which are kind of a luxury on the trail. While staying in a town, lodging can vary between a hotel, a motel, or a less expensive alternative, which would be a hostel. Many of the hostels on the Appalachian Trail are iconic and have been in operation for decades. If you're unfamiliar with a hostel, generally speaking, you'll pay a rate to get a bed in a bunk room. You'll get laundry services, a shower, sometimes a breakfast, and there'll be a great room where you can visit. And of course, that super deluxe home away from home, the tent. The highest point that you come to on the Appalachian Trail is Clingman's Dome in Tennessee, at 6,643 feet above sea level. The lowest elevation on the trail is Bear Mountain State Park in New York at 124 feet above sea level. Not counting the initial purchase of equipment, it costs about $5,000 to hike the Appalachian Trail. Most shoes will only last about 500 miles, which means you'll go through 4 to 5 pairs just during your hike. The most asked question I get is, where do you eat? Fortunately, the Appalachian Trail crosses the road about every 4 miles or so. Once you hit one of the roads, stick out a thumb and hitchhike into town, or you call a shuttle to carry you into town. Sometimes you can actually walk into town. Along the Appalachian Trail, you rarely go more than 4 days without hitting a town. To the surprise of most people, most of your food comes from a grocery store and not from dehydrated meals made for backpackers. Hiker hunger is a condition that most backpackers start experiencing at about week 3 or so. Your body is burning so many calories that you just cannot get enough food. One of the ways that you combat this is when you drop into town, you hit a restaurant and you eat everything in sight. The calorie deficit is so bad that the typical hiker loses about 30 pounds. I'm hoping to keep my town stops to less than 30. However, 2 of those towns, Gatlinburg and Harper's Ferry, are where I'm going to meet my wife, Nancy. There are 3 rivers that the Appalachian Trail crosses that rank amongst the oldest rivers in the world: the French Broad River, the New River, and the Susquehanna River. At about 300 million years old, all 3 of these rivers predate the more recent formation of the Appalachian Mountains. The Appalachian Trail receives about 3 million visitors a year. Of those 3 million, about 3,000 are thru-hikers. Of the 3,000 thru-hikers that start the trail, only about 20 to 25% will finish. Another hiker term that I like, PUD, P-U-D, stands for pointless up and down. Typically, you'll climb a mountain, there's nothing to see, and then you climb down the mountain. No reason at all. The AT goes through Grayson, Highlands State Park, where a herd of wild ponies are maintained. I've also been asked about hiking alone, whether I'm concerned about that or not. With a start date in mid-March, I'm going to be right in the middle of what they call the hiker bubble. That's when the vast majority of people actually start their hike. I'm sure that at some point, relatively early in the trail, I'll find 2 or 3 people that have about the same hiking pace as me that I'll be able to walk with and enjoy my time on the trail with. Grandma Gatewood became the first solo female thru-hiker in 1955 at the age of 67. She subsequently became the first person to hike the AT 3 times. In 2021, Nimble Nomad became the oldest thru-hiker at age 83. I enjoyed reading Grandma Gatewood's biography, and I have to remember while I'm doing this trail, if Grandma Gatewood can do it, and Nimble can do it, then I can too. And yes, Hike Naked Day is an actual thing. I'm just not certain if I'm going to participate. About bears on the trail. I've seen several over the years hiking the Appalachian Trail, and I've never had a bad experience. Rarely does a bad human-bear interaction happen. Typically what happens is you get a picture like this, the backside of a bear. Unless, of course, you're Chuck Norris. My tentative plan right now has me doing about 170 days of hiking on the trail. That should average out to about 15 miles a day. Although I have an ambitious tentative plan, I also know that I'm going to have to play things by ear. This is essentially going to be a once-in-a-lifetime trip, and there are some things that I'm going to want to see and do. This trip, at its most basic, is about getting back into nature. There's also friends to meet, trail towns to experience, breweries, and there's a couple of breweries that I actually want to hit. And ultimately, at the end of this, I'll have an adventure that I can share with others. I have stories to tell, experiences that I can relate to friends and family, and perhaps even a friend or two. And speaking of the end, I'll leave you with a picture of Mount Katahdin, my ultimate goal. Thanks for watching.